In Edinburgh, they sold the corpses of those they murdered for medical research. Back in Edinburgh in 1828, there was a big problem. Medical schools were growing and students needed to practice their anatomy skills. But in order to do that, they needed dead bodies. So something awful started to happen. You'd bury a loved one on the Monday, and by the Friday, all that was left was an empty coffin and a pile of soil. But if you thought grave robbing was bad, it was about to get so much worse. I'd never heard of the sickening case of Burke and Hare until watching Britain's murder map on Sky History. The duo hatched a plan to murder for money after a tenant of theirs died of natural causes and left a debt. To get some money back, Burke and Hare sold the body for medical purposes. Quickly, selling bodies became a worthwhile business venture. And what better way to guarantee a payday than by plotting the deaths of vulnerable victims? To hear how this horrific scheme spiraled and how one of them got the ultimate karma, watch From the 7th of April on Sky History and History Play. This story features as part of a whole series exploring other historic crimes that shaped modern Britain. Check the link in my bio for more info.
Okay, you've probably seen this guy if you know anything about history. His name is Joseph Goebbels. He was a big-time Nazi, okay? He was the Minister for Propaganda. He was basically second in command in Nazi Germany. He was Hitler's close friend. But did you know all of his horrible things with Nazism? You probably know a little bit about him, right? Well, did you know that he also murdered his own children, all 6 of them? He personally helped murder them. Let me set the scene. It's April 1945. Germany is losing the war bad, okay? And they know they're losing too. And so Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda and their 6 children, and they all have names that start with H. So there's Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Hulda, Hedda, and Haida, okay? The oldest is 12, the youngest is barely 5. And they're all hiding out in the bunker in Berlin, Hitler's bunker in Berlin. And they make the decision to kill themselves, right? But it wasn't good enough that they just killed themselves. They also killed their 6 children, right? And what they did is they injected them with morphine to put them to sleep, pretty much, and told them it was just like a regular injection. And then while they were sleeping, they crushed cyanide capsules into their tiny little mouths. And the oldest, who was 12, she woke up during it, and they broke her jaw trying to murder her. And I posted like a tiny little thing about the oldest one on my Instagram, and everyone was telling me, like, don't post this. Like, this is not, like, you cannot support Nazis. I am not supporting Nazis. These children, regardless of who their parents were murdered by Nazis. Okay? So, I want to know other people's opinion on this. They don't have a grave, obviously. Their ashes were just dumped in the Danube River. You can actually find pictures of their bodies. I wouldn't recommend doing that. You can find, like graphic images of them. And they're so little, like, the youngest was 5. And people are calling them Nazis. And I'm just like, that feels really wrong, you know? And I'm just wondering, like, do you consider them to be victims of Nazism? Because I feel like they definitely are, but I was getting totally flamed for posting about them. And by the way, in my post, it was nowhere near to Nazi sympathizing, because I am not that kind of a fat chud. That's not me. I'm not a fucking loser. So, just an idea.
This 2-year-old boy was taken by these 2 10-year-old boys, and he was never seen from again. On February 12th of 1994, 2-year-old James Bulger went along with his mother Denise to a shopping center in Kirkby, England. They stopped at a butcher shop, and as Denise was paying, she let go of her son's hand, and as soon as she was done paying, she turned around and her son was gone. As soon as she realized that her son was missing, she immediately reported it to a nearby police station. Police started searching the area, and as they were viewing CCTV footage, they saw that James left with 2 young boys. As soon as that footage was viewed by James's father, he felt a sigh of relief, because he felt like he was with 2 kids. They wouldn't hurt him, right? It was revealed that on the day James went missing, he walked out of the butcher shop and saw 2 10-year-old boys by the names of John Venables and Robert Thompson, and they led him out of the mall. Maybe at first these 2 10-year-old boys seemed harmless, but all along they had plans to abduct a young child that day. 38 people witnessed James with these 2 boys. Some claimed that he was crying, while others claimed that he was laughing and playing, but no one chose to intervene until 2 women noticed that these boys seemed suspicious. When those women asked who that toddler belonged to, They stated that that was their little brother, or they were taking him to the police station because he was lost. Robert and John ended up taking James to some railroad tracks where they began torturing him. They kicked him, stamped him, threw bricks on him, and even put batteries in his mouth. Eventually, they dropped a 22-pound iron bar over his head, and James lost his life. Eventually, Robert and John put James's body on the railroad track so that when a train went by, it would look like his death was an accident. As police were looking for a suspect, police received a phone call from a lady stating that she recognized John's jacket from the footage and stated that John and Robert were absent from school that day. Both of the boys were taken in for questioning, and there was some confusion when looking back at the footage because it looked like those two boys were teenagers, not 10 years old. Once forensic results came back, it did reveal that it was Robert and John. Eventually, the boys confessed to the abduction and murder of James, and they were sentenced to a minimum of 8 years. Robert and John were diagnosed with PTSD and were released in June of 2001 and given new identities.
So I feel like not enough Americans have any idea what's going on between us and Iran because American media fails to give historical context and they just use lightning words like war, Iran, Middle East, bombs, missiles. And I'm like, okay, queen. Sure. So I'm going to explain it in a way that makes sense, and I'm going to tell the truth. So the government that runs Iran today exists partly because of something that we did decades ago. So back in 1953, Iran actually had a democratically elected government, meaning that their people voted for their leader the same way that we do. But that government tried to take control of its own oil instead of letting foreign companies like us profit from it. And the United States was like, and we overthrew them. So we replaced their democracy with a dictator called the Shah. And this happened whether the people of Iran liked it or not. And hint, they didn't like it. But the CIA had essentially looked at Iranian democracy and said, yeah, we're going to go ahead and get rid of that. We can't have that. So for the next couple of decades, the Shah ruled Iran. Sorry if you see me itching myself. There's mosquitoes out here. But the Shah ruled Iran with U.S. backing until 1979 when the Iranian Revolution happened. So basically huge uprising. The people overthrew their government and finally removed him and created the government that Iran has today. So I know what some people are going to say. Some people are going to be like, but Iran's leadership today is oppressive. So isn't this a good thing that we're going to war with them? No, war is never good. Okay. It's not our jobs to be Captain Save-A-Ho, first off. But yes, Iran restricts women's rights. They crack down on protests, political opposition. That's real. That's not propaganda per se. But what's important is that their government exists today, coming out of a 1979 revolution, which only happened because we overthrew their democracy and replaced it with a dictator. Why are we leaving that part out? When people are like, oh no, the United States had to step in because Iran's leadership is bad. Well, the political conditions that created that leadership were heavily shaped by our intervention. So in other words, the United States isn't solving a problem that just appeared out of nowhere. We're intervening in a situation that we helped create decades ago that has now gotten essentially out of hand. And so now all these countries that are allied are all for 45 years or have been doing what political scientists call regional tension, where it's like this long standoff where we fight indirectly through sanctions, cyber attacks, proxy groups like terrorists, occasional strikes, instead of a full-on war. But now we fast forward to today and we go, Israel and Palestine. Iran financially and militarily supports groups that oppose Israel. So we've got Hamas and Hezbollah. United States is Israel's biggest military ally. So we fund and supply a lot of Israel's military power, if not all of it. So every time fighting breaks out, the U.S. and Iran do this thing where they're like, no, I'm not talking about you, bitch. I'm not talking about you, when they're clearly talking about you. But instead of talking, it's missiles. So what you end up with is 3 overlapping conflicts at the exact same time. We've got the United States and Iran, Israel versus Palestinian groups, and a broader regional power struggle essentially in the Middle East. Basically, different countries are competing for power and influence in the region. So when Iranian officials are on the news saying, we don't want to negotiate with the United States, we don't want a ceasefire, we're ready for you, you should be scared. And this is not Iraq in 2003. My father fought Operation Iraqi Freedom and we still got our asses kicked because small does not equal weak. Iran is one of the largest militaries in the region and huge missile capabilities and terrain that makes invasion an absolute nightmare. So in other words, if we do go to war, it will get ugly fast. And really, we already have, because matter of fact, if you made it this long in the video, the United States media is underreporting the amount of American casualties that are happening right now. Like I know they said something about like 6 American deaths. Girl, try hundreds. Hundreds. Go watch international news and see what they are saying is actually happening. Do not trust American news. You are Democratic or Republican. You are feeding into propaganda. I'm going back inside, but it's a lot worse than you think.
This woman vanished but kept texting everyone for 4 years. 37-year-old Carrie Farver was living in Iowa with her son, and she was described as smart and hardworking. She was known to be bubbly and approachable, and she had a very stable life. In 2012, Carrie met 37-year-old Dave at a local dating event, and they hit it off pretty quickly. Dave was from Nebraska, and he had recently separated from his wife, so he was just looking for something fun and casual. Dave made it pretty clear to Carrie that he wasn't looking for anything serious or exclusive right away. Since Dave was dating around, he was also seeing another woman named Liz Golyar. Liz was working as a waitress, and supposedly she was really nice, but she was competitive when it came to men. Since Carrie and Liz were seeing Dave at the same time, they knew about each other. There was one night Carrie was leaving Dave's apartment and Liz was going towards his apartment, so they literally just walked past each other. On the night of December 13th of 2012, it was the last time anyone had physically seen Carrie. Carrie had went to Dave's apartment and spent the night. The next morning she left and she was gone. Her family immediately knew that something was wrong. She wasn't the type of person to not show up to work. She wouldn't bail on her son. It just wasn't her. Within a few days of her disappearance, text messages started flooding Carrie's family, friends, and even Dave, and it wasn't the typical, "Hey, I'm okay" text message. It was more like, "Hey, I'm moving to Kansas for a new job and I need space." Then those messages towards Dave started to become more jealous and aggressive, and she was telling him how she hated his guts and she was going to ruin his life. Carrie's parents even got a text that she was moving to another state and didn't want to contact them anymore or her son, and they were just crushed because they knew that something wasn't right. And these messages lasted for a total of 4 years. These messages continued to threaten Dave and Liz, his new exclusive girlfriend. Carrie stated that she was watching them and knew specific details about what was going on in their lives, and it got so bad that they even had to get a restraining order on her. Since Carrie was texting everyone in her life and she's an adult, she can choose whatever she wants to do. If she wants to leave, she can leave. Law enforcement saw this as someone who just wanted a new life. Fast forward to 2015, and 2 cold case detectives started to look at the case again. They felt like Carrie's family was right. Carrie was not acting like herself, so they started to look into Dave and Liz, and Dave was cleared pretty quickly, but Liz was acting a little strange. Liz claimed that she was also being harassed by Carrie, and when her house burned down, it was Carrie. She even showed investigators a handwritten letter that supposedly Carrie wrote to her, and investigators decided to look into a digital footprint. It showed that there was over 12,000 texts and emails, so they decided to look at the IP address and cell phone towers, and it showed that these messages were sent using local Wi-Fi slots. And guess who worked, lived, and frequented those areas? Liz. In 2016, the case broke open thanks to all the key pieces of evidence. Liz claimed that she was in an accident and lost a lot of blood, so they looked at her medical records and it revealed that she was never in an accident. The detectives had Liz's iPad, and as they were looking through her deleted photos, they saw that she had a photo of Carrie's foot and another photo of Carrie's dead body. Once the evidence was put in front of Liz, she admitted to everything. Liz admitted that she was the one communicating with everyone, and she stated she did this to protect Dave because Carrie had ended the life of her ex-boyfriend, and Carrie was forcing her to impersonate her. But the truth was, Liz was just jealous that Carrie was also seeing Dave because she wanted Dave to herself, so she ended her life. In 2017, Liz was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison. She found photos of herself on her stepfather's computer. Jade Jenks was an interior designer from Southern California, and she lived a pretty normal life. Her stepfather, Thomas Merriman, was no ordinary guy. He co-founded Butterfly Farms, which was a non-profit catered to butterfly conservation. The two had a close but sometimes complicated relationship. He had married Jade's mother but ended up getting divorced. Still, Jade and Tom remained in contact, and she would help him manage things, especially when his health started to decline. In December of 2020, Tom was in the hospital recovering from an injury, and meanwhile, Jade went to his home to tidy up, and this was something that she would often do. As she was cleaning, she happened to open up his computer, and that's when she found hundreds of nude and explicit photos of herself. Some of these photos were selfies that she had sent to her boyfriends, while others were taken without her knowledge, like when she was sleeping or while she was changing her clothes. All of these photos were organized into folders. They were tagged and named. To Jade, it felt like a massive betrayal. She felt violated, so she told her close friends about what she had found, and during that time, she started to plan something. On December 31st, Jade went to go pick up Tom from the hospital to bring him home, and he would never leave that house again. During that night, Jade gave Tom a bunch of medications and waited for him to pass out. On January 1st of 2021, Tom's body was found by a handyman who was called to the property, and he found Tom's body under a pile of trash wrapped in a blanket. Once Tom's body was discovered, authorities were called. An autopsy was done, but it couldn't confirm the exact cause of death since there was no signs of trauma. Investigators were zeroing in on Jade, and when they looked at her phone, they saw text messages, medications, and they interviewed people that last spoke to her. In 2022, Jade was charged with first-degree murder. At first, Jade stated that Tom is the one who took all the medications, and when he was unresponsive, she didn't know what to do, so she didn't call 911. However, the jury wasn't convinced because once they saw the text messages between her and her friends and the medication she had, she was found guilty. In April of 2023, Jade was sentenced 25 years to life in prison.
So I've always said that whenever World War III decides to begin, that they would definitely, whenever historians look back and have to write about World War III, that they would have to discuss 9/11. And so in light of everything going on in the world, let's have this conversation today. So I'm going to try my best to tell you kind of how I feel on 9/11 without deep diving into my own personal conspiracies. But when we're forming our personal conspiracies on major historical events, instead of looking at what happened, it's important to ask who benefited when trying to figure out what happened, right? Because two governments clearly benefited the most from this, and that was the United States and Israel. 9/11 was devastating for ordinary Americans because, I mean, nearly 3,000 people lost their lives that day. But something we forget to talk about is that at that time, the United States government was struggling to get public support for war before 9/11, because the reason we wanted to go to war is because the idea of expanding United States military power in the Middle East was already being discussed before 9/11, right? And here's a good little fact for you. So in the 1990s, late 1990s, a Washington think tank, which is, how do I explain what that is? It's basically like a group of like policy experts and former government officials, and they like write reports suggesting what the United States government should do. And they published a report about expanding military power and influence in the Middle East. And this report argued that the United States should increase its military presence in the Middle Eastern region and remove certain governments like Iraq. But it also said something interesting, and this is why I'm including it in the video. The report said that major changes to United States military strategy would probably happen uber slowly, unless there was some catastrophic and catalyzing event. And I quote, they referred to it as something like a new Pearl Harbor. This report was published in 2000, and obviously a year later 9/11 happens, and suddenly political barriers just like collapsed and disappeared, you know. And within weeks, United States launches what we called the War on Terror. We sent our U.S. military to Afghanistan and later invaded Iraq. My father fought Operation Iraqi Freedom. Like, this is not new to me. Those wars lasted for decades and dramatically expanded our military presence across huge parts of the Middle East. And at the same time, the government also passed the Patriot Act. And I feel like a lot of people hear that word, but a lot of people don't know what it is. The Patriot Act essentially expanded government surveillance on American citizens, right under our noses too. It allowed intelligence agencies to collect phone records, track your financial activity, monitor communication, gather your personal data, all from American citizens in ways that before 9/11, like, more than likely would have caused public backlash. Because something we forget to focus on is that post 9/11 propaganda created fear and urgency in Americans, which made these powers a lot easier to get away with, right? And internationally outside of the US. It strengthened the political position of Israel. Because for years, decades before 9/11, Israel had been dealing with violent conflict connected to the Israeli-Palestine struggle. Because yes, that's how long this has been going on. And honestly, if you want to talk about it, Israel and Palestine has a lot to do with 9/11, but that is not a conversation we're having today, like I said. Anyway, Israeli leaders, a lot of them, when asked about what's going on in the Middle East and their involvement, a lot of them would pretty much just explain it or write it off as like a broader fight against terrorism, which like debatable as fuck, like totally debatable. But after 9/11, this like framing of like Middle East equals terrorism became like the normal way of thinking in the Western world when talking about the conflicts going on in the Middle East. For many Americans growing up through the war propaganda, like me, myself, I'm Gen Z, I was born in 2002. A lot of us were taught to believe that the Middle East equaled terrorism, right? We were all like built in this like fear. We actually saw it was like a 1,600% increase in anti-Muslim hate crimes, and that's how powerful the post 9/11 like narrative linking the Middle East to terrorism became in American culture. So when you really step back and look at what happened after 9/11, it raises kind of a funky question of like, you have an event that devastated ordinary people, right? But it also ended up giving that same government to those people political support that they needed to launch war conveniently, right? And expanded surveillance on our own citizens, right? And strengthen the American-Israel alliance, right? Now, this doesn't automatically prove anything. I'm not saying anything, okay? But it does make you wonder why throughout history, these huge tragedies often end up expanding the power of governments, corrupt ones, conveniently, right? But sometimes my point is that the most important question is not what happened, it's who benefited from it. And that might answer your question. I didn't say it.
She was in this creepy house in the middle of the night with no running water or even working lights. And her final text was, "Please hurry, I'm scared." Brooklyn Farthing was a gorgeous 18-year-old girl from Berea in Kentucky. It was summer 2013 and she'd just graduated from high school and was super excited to let her hair down. She was an incredibly hard worker and was very talented with hair and makeup. It kind of made sense that she would go into a career where she could end up making other people look and feel beautiful. She'd previously been in this serious relationship with a guy called Jared, so much so that they were actually engaged. And I'm not sure why, but they did end up splitting up. Maybe it was just because they were so young. Regardless, they were still on good terms and Brooke's future was really looking up. She'd passed her driving test on the 21st of June, but it was actually really awkward because her sister, Paige, also had her driving test on the same day and failed. But the pair had got plans to go to this party later on. Brooke to celebrate and Paige to drown her sorrows, I guess. They went to this field/house party with their cousin, but Paige and the cousin ended up just not feeling the vibe. Maybe Paige was a bit bummed because she'd failed the test. So Paige and the cousin decided they wanted to go home, and Brooke was actually okay with this because she'd got all her stuff with her. She did have plans to go and stay after the party with another one of her girlfriends, but you know how it is at a party when you're younger and kind of plans change, people start drinking. It ended up that Brooke's friend, this girl she was going to stay with, ended up leaving with a guy, and Brooke wasn't really very happy about this. Her friend had kind of screwed her over and Brooke really was stuck at this party now with nowhere to stay and no lift home. She felt desperate, so she ended up accepting a lift from an older guy called Josh Hensley. It was Brooke, Josh, and another random guy who was too drunk to drive himself home that all got in a car together. But for some reason, Josh didn't actually end up taking Brooke home. He took her back to his place that had no running water or electrics. It was literally like a sea den, to be honest. And poor Brooke was actually texting people when she was there saying she didn't feel comfortable and she wanted to leave. She ended up in desperation texting her ex, Jared, at 4 a.m. saying, "Please, could you come and get me?" But sadly, he was actually in the middle of working a night shift, so he wasn't actually able to until the morning. Her last messages were, "Please hurry, I'm scared." Now, I say her last messages because I have a hunch that the next are from her phone, but not from Brooke. Jared got a text from her phone at 5 a.m.-ish, so an hour later after she said she was scared, saying, "Never mind, I'm okay, I'm going to a party in Rockcastle County," which was a huge change from being so scared that you want somebody to collect you really quickly, who goes to a party at 5 a.m.? Jared never heard from Brooke ever again. Her personal belongings were never found, and she never showed up to the plans she'd made with a friend the next day. But it gets so much more disturbing than that, because that very same day, Brooke's friends and family were searching for her, understandably, and ended up trying to get in touch with this Josh guy. When they finally did get in touch with him, he was like, yeah, she went off to some party and that's all I know. But then he was like, oh yeah, she left some stuff at my house too. And do you know what's even more bizarre? He was like, yeah, I'm just currently outside of the house because there's a big fire inside. Sorry, what? Mysteriously, the house was on fire, and his story was that Brooke had been inside of the house when the fire started, and he'd been out tending to his horses. But when emergency services ran over there, they were like, no, this makes no sense. The only thing that was actually on fire was the sofa, that was actually so burnt that it was burnt to a crisp. But there was not a shred of Brooke's belongings anywhere, not even her phone, and those can be pretty hardy in fires. Funnily enough, there was never any mention of this Rockcastle County party. Nobody had been there, nobody knew anybody who'd had a party. Then police got a lifeline. 2 days later, while hunting for Brooke, they noticed her phone pinged off a tower in Blue Lick. But sadly, it didn't help them locate the missing girl. And disturbingly, just years later, Josh was arrested for harmful behaviour towards a minor and possessing child CSA images. That just shows you what kind of person Josh is, and he was the last person known to see Brooke before she vanished. Her case chillingly remains unsolved, and her family have no closure and no justice.